In forests, a sign that there's no predators around is a lot of birds chirping. And so naturally, people's nervous systems become really regulated when they hear the chirping of birds because it signals to the subconscious body that you're safe. If a predator was around, you would start to hear silence because the birds wouldn't be calling attention to themselves. Now, all of a sudden, you're attuning to nature and you're saying, what's going on? The part of our brain that dreams is also our prefrontal cortex, but it's the right side, which is also speaking to us in terms of language, but not verbal language. It speaks to us in terms of sensory language. Symbols and images and things that create a sensational experience, a sensory experience. Sensory data is far superior to intellectual data. It always will be because pictures are worth 1,000 words. Images and symbols give us the feeling of something that can hold so much more data than a sentence possibly can.
Welcome everyone to the Eons Ahead Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Wolfe. And on this show, we like to dive deep in conversation with incredible people that are eons ahead. And what does that mean to be eons ahead? Well, it means that they're ahead of the curve. They see things other people don't see, and they're able to communicate this vision to the world. And not only that, but to manifest it into reality to make a positive impact for humanity. They're often doing things that nobody else does, which I love. They're pioneers, they're trailblazers, they're conscious leaders. And my guest here today is all the above. She's also a good friend. Her name is Adrian Ellison. She is a conscious leader. She is a connector of resources for women that are looking to heal their physical and emotional trauma. She has spent years of her life studying the layers of quantum healing, and now she curates community safe spaces for these women to find clarity and solutions for their unique trauma. She's had hundreds of transformation within these spaces that she's curated. It's truly remarkable. These women are healing physically through the power of the subconscious mind, facilitated by Adrian. Adrian has also overcome severe illness herself after years of suffering and unable to get the help from Western medicine. She took her health into her own hands, which I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and I'm happy to say that she's now happy, healthy, and thriving. She's definitely eons ahead. She's my good friend, Adrian Ellison.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. That was a wonderful intro.
Hey, you're so welcome. So happy to have you here.
Yes.
So there's a lot of cool stuff that you're doing in the world, and I want to dive into as much as we can here. But one thing that I caught in the intro that was really exciting was quantum healing. So for the viewers that don't know about quantum healing, tell us a little bit more about that and how you got into it.
Yeah, that's a great question to start off with. Yeah, I think when a lot of people look at healing, especially from a Western perspective, it's very compartmentalized. We start to isolate certain things that are going on and think that they are isolated incidences. And so we, attack them through the lens of Western medicine by how do I treat this specific isolated incident? But what we've come to learn through studying the body as a whole, the fascia, how the muscles communicate with the joints, and how all of this is being communicated through the nervous system, which is communicated to through the cells and through our DNA, and everything that you could possibly want to go and explore when it comes to healing your body, whether that's herbs, whether that's Chinese medicine, getting your acupuncture done, chiropractic, if it's going to have a surgery that you need to have something taken out of. All of these isolated incidences are actually very connected. And so for me, holding spaces where women can learn about their quantum selves, their multidimensional selves, it's everything from looking at what the body is communicating, like the symptom that's communicating as a messenger of a larger scale of what's going on within the ecosystem. And the body really is such an ecosystem. It's very much like nature. And one aspect of the subconscious that I find to be just so fascinating, I can see it mirrored in nature, is like the mycelium chain that runs underneath the earth, right? And it's what's responsible for communicating between vastly different climates that are actually not separate from each other. Like we think that the rainforest is separate from the Sahara Desert because they're completely different climates, but they're not. And actually, there's so much that happens in the Amazon rainforest that communicates with the Sahara Desert, that communicates with the Rocky Mountains, which is responsible for some of the plasma and things that are going on in the ocean that produce oxygen. And so we just think the rainforest is responsible for oxygen. And that's a really linear kind of left brain way of seeing healing. And when you treat symptoms and when you treat the body as if it's this compartmentalized, isolated, separate, linear healing process, you miss like the vast majority of what the body's actually capable of from a quantum perspective, which is that energy in its dense form, is our body. And so our fascia, our organs, our nervous system, our ancestral lineages, those that came before us, the way that our DNA is communicating to us based on environments that, yes, we've been in, but also environments that our ancestors lived in. One of the things I've studied that is a part of this kind of quantum healing game for me personally is the study of vibration and gene expression. I'm like super, super passionate about it. And I got into it several years ago because some of the things that were showing up in my body were things I wasn't, like Western medicine was just like completely unable to help me with. And then as I started to explore things like epigenetics and things like, okay, well, maybe these were passed to me from my parents, but I was adopted. So I didn't have the same access points as some people do to ask about, what's gone on previously through the ancestral line. And that's where I started to become really interested in, what was possible. And I would go in and I would experience emotions and sensations in my body that I couldn't tie memories to necessarily. And that's just where I started to really grow my perspective of like, maybe what the body's holding is so much greater than what we can see, what we can name, what we can isolate and, label. And that really is what I feel quantum healing is the ability to look beyond what we can see within ourselves and even just within our families and understand that collectively we are having this experience that's really not that different from the person next to us. We have very unique ways in which it communicates through our symptoms and through our behaviors and through our addictions. But underneath it all, we're all vibrational beings that are learning how to house vibration within our body. And a part of that vibration is learning to dance between, vibrational states that are states of enlightenment that we very rarely touch here. Some people touch that through psychedelics or, through deep surrendered states or, vipassanas or places where you go intentionally to reach higher states of consciousness. But for the most part, and every day to day, moving through life, we're actually just experiencing this distortion of all of that free vibration and learning how take responsibility for that distortion and also to take responsibility for things that maybe we didn't start with us, but we're like, maybe it will end with us. So quantum healing for me is the multi-dimensional layers of what is actually being housed within the human experience, both that we can see and unsee, and the opportunity to meet science and recognize that science is merely just a metric to measure what we are capable of measuring thus far.
Right.
And then to leave space for curiosity in these other aspects of consciousness that are very right-brained, that there's no science to represent because it's everything. It's the quantum, it's entanglement. It's where everything, one atom affects another atom from completely separate distances that shouldn't be connected, but they are. And so that's really what the quantum healing is about, is deep, deep connection, which I believe is really what we're here to experience for ourselves.
Wow, fascinating. There's a lot there. That's fantastic information. There's a lot when you bring up about it where you talk Western medicine and it's very separate and it's very linear and it's very analytical and it sounds like it's very masculine type energy, like very separating and isolating. Would you say like the quantum side of it, and I think you alluded to that, is more on the other side of the brain where it's more expansive, it's more feminine, it's more infinite? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love this question as well. So one of the areas of kind of quantum science that I found myself in by accident by going to therapy is this idea of how do you look at your life and make decisions from the highest perspective, which some people call their higher self, right? So like, what is the higher self? Like, what is that? What is masculine? What is feminine? How do they dance together? Are they separate? Are they together? And I landed myself into this work by, I can't remember the woman's name, but we should definitely find out so that we can credit her. But she wrote a book called Whole Brain Living, and it's all about neuroanatomy and the 4 segments of the brain. And ultimately, just to keep it really easy, the left brain is responsible for separating and organizing cosmic flow. So it's the part of the brain that's able to understand the difference between the past, the present, and the future. It's the only part of our brain that knows that I'm separate from you, that knows that I'm separate from this chair, and that if I were to get up and I was to walk outside, that I wouldn't run myself into traffic.
Right.
So it's responsible for the organization of chaos.
Yes.
The right part of the brain does not see separation, doesn't even have the faculty to be able to see separation. And so where the left brain is constantly organizing and separating and comparing and contrasting and creating an idea of superiority and inferiority, and it's all about comparison, because the comparison is what allows the difference between the texture. This is just, the right brain is just all textures.
Right.
And it's mostly sensory. And so it's a sensory body. So it could be considered the feminine, could be considered the inner child. It could be considered, our sensations. The left brain is here to provide logic and understanding, and the right brain is here to create the felt experience. So the 4 parts of the brain that help us to understand how to take our healing into a much, trying to think of the word, verbose way of tackling our healing journey, is to understand that most of the time when we are using our left brain to try to tackle a situation, we're just by nature in the illusion of separation, and we are going to create a solution that is most likely based on avoiding the past. If you're only living in the left brain, that's literally what the left brain's doing. Back of the left brain is thinking about the past and comparing everything that's going on to a past moment that hurt you so that you will avoid that moving forward. And the front brain is thinking all about the future. How do I maintain my goals based on the structures and strategies and the timeline that I have going on? So most people in Western medicine rely so heavily on that framework. And so all we really know in our history books is what's happened before and the studies that have happened before, which are, not really that great contextually, because most of those studies that are being done are paid for by people who want those studies to look a certain way, or they're done by men ages 25 to 45. So there's no women in there. So there's no real understanding of like the hormones that are taking place. So there's a lot of limitations already. And it's all being decided by the part of the mind that is the most limited part of the mind. But it is the part of the mind that communicates in terms of language in a very organized way. So without it, we could have gnosis, the feeling of gnosis when it lands in the body.
Embodying knowing.
Yeah, that's like 100% right brain. Like there's no organization that's needed for gnosis. It is just the felt experience of I understand. That wouldn't get us very far if we were trying to, diagnose something or to take action to create a strategy for how we're going to tackle something that is going on in somebody's body. So yeah, the right brain allows us to sense so much more. And it's why I'm so passionate about learning around quantum healing, around, whole brain healing and living, is because something that, I study is dreams.
Right.
And the part of our brain that dreams is also our prefrontal cortex, but it's the right side, which is also speaking to us in terms of language, but not verbal language. It speaks to us in terms of sensory language through symbols and images and things that create a sensational experience, a sensory experience that's like, I am sensing this. Sensory data is far superior to intellectual data, and always will be, because picture's worth 1,000 words. Images and symbols give us the feeling of something that can hold so much more data than a sentence possibly can.
Right.
So when I talk about Western medicine and how they approach treating people's symptoms, there's not even a conversation that's well-rounded enough, because there is no space for right brain understanding. If we were doing that, that would require a tremendous amount of, honestly, it would require us to completely deconstruct the foundation of Western medicine as a whole. And it would also require for medical professionals to admit that they don't really know what's going on, which is something that actually happens a lot, which is why there's so much malpractice, it being the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States.
Wow.
And it also being something that's not really it's frowned upon, if you're an Ivy League PhD and somebody comes to you and you say, I don't know, it really jeopardizes kind of the identity that is you're trained to put in place as a way to be, America's heroes in this way, like the person that's there that people can rely on. Like if people really had to sit with the fact that safety is mostly an illusion, and that if you have to put your life in someone else's hands and they felt like that person knew just as little as they really did, right? So medical professionals, they niche down, they really go into this certain area and they have all of this information about these very specific things. So if you've got a plastic surgeon, they know a lot about the plastic surgery aspects of what they're going to be doing. But they're not necessarily somebody that I would want to do a kidney transplant on me.
Right.
And I wouldn't want somebody that's doing a kidney transplant on me to be responsible for the circuitry of my body, because they're going to prioritize what's going on in my kidneys as being the number one thing. And you actually see that in the medical industry. Like when my dad had cancer and he also needed to be on dialysis because he had kidney failure, what led to his death was ultimately that he was misdiagnosed. And like medical professionals sometimes can't agree on how to take a course of action because everyone that is specialized in what they're specialized is saying this is the priority. When really the priority is to be able to sense something deeper that's actually going on in the body, and to be able to sense how all of this seemingly separate things are actually interconnected, and how these symptoms are just messages for a larger kind of foundational, fundamental challenge that's going on. And usually that is going to be within the nervous system, because no matter how much plant medicine you do or where you want to go to take your healing, your body's capacity to be able to let go of things that it's been holding is probably its greatest strength. If we have a certain capacity, and we learn this is why when we're children, we have parents and we have caretakers, because our capacity to understand the complexities of life is very minimal. If people have lived in the Western medicine world most of their life, you can guess that their ability and their capacity to understand the world as a whole is probably also quite limited.
Right. Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff there. I want to ask a couple questions. One, you said something that safety is an illusion. And I could relate to that. For me, safety has always been cultivated from within. You know, I used to have a lot of fears as a child that I overcame. And then I realized that those fears were an illusion, and the safety that I created for myself was a construct that I just chose to believe in. So can you elaborate on the fact that you say safety is an illusion?
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to, say, a woman is getting ready to go into surgery and she's like, I'm safe because I'm with a medical professional, somebody that's spent years going to school and understanding exactly what it is that my body needs. And again, we said that malpractice is the third leading cause of death.
Right.
So this idea of placing authority outside of ourselves and safety outside of ourselves kind of gets reflected back to us by being like, I have a nervous system that doesn't really know how to maintain and cultivate safety within myself. I mean, really, you think about it, like we're sitting here and we're in a really safe room, and that's great. But at any moment, if somebody that was out of their mind, high-level schizophrenic, comes in off the streets, and maybe the door is locked, and that's great, right? So you're like looking at like, okay, well, we're safe because the door is locked. And it's like, well, if that person has an axe? And of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. But the idea for you and I to sit here and to believe that we are 100% physically safe and nothing could happen to us in this room is delusional. Like, not to speak on bad things happening, but they happen all the time. People have heart attacks. Every single one of us is going to die at some point.
True.
So there's that. The physical aspect of safety is like, you can do the best that you can to create environments that are as safe as they could possibly be. And there's always going to be external variables that you just can't account for. Now, I do believe that your vibration has a lot to do with the things that are like entering your field. I absolutely believe multiple planes are existing at the same time. So it's like, I feel like when I'm with you, our vibration's really high. Like we've never had any issues with anything happening, right? I've been with other friends where they're having a bad day, I'm having a bad day, and we just seem to run into all the wrong people and all the wrong places, and I twist my ankle, and it's just like, I'm in a pocket, right? It's like the energy. So there's also more of a multidimensional conversation. But then when it comes to emotional safety, and this is the conversation around boundaries that I absolutely love, is because so many people think that boundaries are telling somebody you cannot do this. And boundaries are actually saying, like, regardless of whether you do this or not, I will do what I need to do for me.
Right.
And so, with emotional safety, there's nothing that somebody else could do to help you maintain longevity of your emotional safety. Because if you require for somebody else to do something in order for you to feel safe, that's very fragile.
Right.
So there's not actual safety.
Right. You're giving somebody else the responsibility to make you feel safe or not.
Yes, it's not actual safety.
Right.
Right. And safety for me feels like having this autonomy where I know that I've got me, and that no matter what goes on in my external environment, no matter if somebody just turns on me and I thought they were one thing and they're another, or if I'm walking down the street and, somebody's losing their mind and I'm in the wrong part of town, or if all of a sudden, like all of my clients decide like, hey, we all hate you and we don't want to work with you anymore. And I'm like, oh no, my financial stuff, the safety that I cultivate is getting to a point where I feel like I'm capable of taking care of myself. And this is a big part of my season this year, moving off grid, moving into a tiny home, learning to work with the elements. Because I realized at one point I'm living in this like big, nice house and I've got the car and I've got the job and I've got the friends. And then I go on a trip to Hawaii and I run out of propane and I don't have a car. And I start thinking like, what if there was like a tsunami or like a tropical storm? I don't have a car. I don't know anybody here. What if I was in a country where I didn't speak the language? And I'm like, I don't even know how to start a fire without a lighter.
Right. Yeah.
Like true safety lives within understanding how to live in harsh conditions and maintain like your own livelihood, and then extended safety outside of that is like somebody who's so capable of doing that for themselves that they can actually start to provide that for others.
Right.
Which I don't see a lot of people in our generation that are left that are able to do that, which is why I think like even from a subconscious place, everybody feels so unsafe because at the end of the day, if shit were to hit the fan, which one of us is starting the fire?
Right.
Which one of us is hunting?
But yeah.
Like I can start the fire.
But no, you're making up some great points here. We've been so far removed from nature into this modern world that we've lost, or we haven't even cultivated any real skills to be valuable in nature. And if shit hits the fan, pardon my French, but like a lot of people will be scared. So I could sense like that there's this deep, probably underlying sense of not feeling safe, maybe subconsciously, like because their subconscious knows that if shit hits the fan, they won't be safe. So is that maybe why people are constantly trying to mask that or fill up that void of not feeling safe with, food or drugs or alcohol or distractions or scrolling? Does that add up?
Yeah, I think that what you touched on is kind of this subconscious, like people don't even know that they're afraid, but they are afraid. And that's really what ego is. Ego is like, it fills in the gaps of the fragility that like, if we were to address, we would freak out, which is why we never address it. And so like for me, I naturally put myself in confrontation with things all the time that are like really jarring for my system because it teaches me so much about like where I'm actually at in real time. For instance, my dry fast. So there's the aspect of me that went into my dry fast thinking like, I'm so scared I could die, playing the game of I could, and then you get into it. And then there's also levels of actual survival that the body and the nervous system go into that like, unless you have taken your body there before, you're naturally going to feel afraid. Like there's the imminent threat of death physically, and then also emotionally that is kind of happening all the time. And I think so much of the ego work that everybody's doing is to confront the part of their brain, which is that left back amygdala brain that is scared of change, transformation, and death. That's its biggest fear. So if that part of our brain is always on all the time, 24/7, it doesn't ever turn off. Like the game is not to shut down shadow and fear. You can't.
Right.
The game is to learn how to turn the volume of that being in the driver's seat and being the loudest like instrument in the symphony and to create harmony within the symphony so that the sound of it is actually something that's harmonious. It adds to the value of the full spectrum of human experience. And that part of the brain though, when it's, kind of in the driver's seat, but people don't have awareness of it because they've never really looked at their patterns and their behaviors and their thought, their like thought processes, then that is in the driver's seat. So they're afraid, but the way that part of the brain works is like, I'm so afraid, I have to do everything I can to mitigate coming into contact with my fear. So it's afraid and it's doing everything it can to not have to confront the fear, which means that that's what's completely unconscious about it. The most afraid people will be so defensive about how afraid they are. Like if I was to poke at you about things that you're not afraid of at all, and I was to be like, no, Alex, come on, you're afraid.
You just laugh it off.
Yeah, you'd be like, this is weird. Or then you would turn around and be like, why do you need me to be afraid of this? Like you would actually be able to facilitate a conversation and turn it around and be like, is this maybe your thing? So that's somebody who's able to recognize like, I am afraid. Everyone that I know of that I trust deeply, that if shit were to hit the fan, that I would be on their front doorstep first as fast as I could get there, are people that I know are afraid and are doing the things that they need to do to cultivate as much safety as they can. Again, that's from the perspective of like if physical things were going on, right? Outages or whatever, but whatever goes on in the world. And then there's a conversation of emotional safety similarly that I feel like the person who doesn't take responsibility for anything in their life other than just like paying, their bills to keep the lights on, but they're not necessarily building a relationship with nature or doing anything to take responsibility for how they would show up and contribute to society if they didn't have the things that they have. Like what value do you actually add?
Right.
What belonging? And I feel like our generation's gotten to this point where people just want to be validated for their value when they don't actually have any skills or bring anything. And it's like the trophy thing, so that's like a whole nother conversation. But I really sat with myself and was just like, first of all, I don't feel safe with myself. I would have to rely on another person. Before I did my dry fast, if there was a water shortage, I could not honestly 100% tell you that I would not take water from like a child or an old person. I don't know. And I wouldn't believe anybody who's never gone for extended amount of days without water that tells me how they would behave. You don't know how you would behave because when your body goes into survival, you really find out what you're willing to do. So those of us that are super privileged that have just lived in environments where we weren't, in the deepest layers of survival, like we have this sense of safety. But again, that safety that's actually cultivated from like, I know what I'm capable of and I know how I could provide for myself and others. That to me is true safety.
Wow. Yeah, I could only imagine what would come up after, how long was your dry fast again?
7 days.
7 days, yeah. You're just unlocking layers of survival that have never been tapped into before. So I can only imagine. Wanted to ask, for the viewers at home this is new to them, and they are maybe just hearing some of this stuff for the first time in regards to the different categories of the brain and the different voices in the head. You and I have had conversations about this, and I've been paying more and more attention to the voices in my head, and even thanking that, I forget what part of it is, so feel free to interject, but the part of me that's pointing out danger, I like to thank that voice now and integrate him more. And like you said, he's not in the driver's seat, but he's helping out along the way in this vessel that I'm living in. So what are some things that, the average person at home can do to start paying attention to this stuff, to start helping them integrate?
Great question. I think this is like such a good starting point for so many people that are on their healing journey, is to learn about their brain and the way that the brain communicates with their nervous system. Whole Brain Living is a phenomenal book. And again, we should get the author's name. But if you're somebody that does not want to sit down and read an incredibly thorough book, I did an hour-long workshop that breaks down the entire book that you can access through my Instagram. If you go to the link in my Instagram, it's called Shadow Work Through the Lens of Neuroanatomy. And it breaks down all 4 quadrants of the brain, what they're responsible for, and how to really ultimately integrate the symphony of that so that you can have like a roundtable discussion with your brain. That way you don't have all these kind of compartmentalized versions of yourself where all of a sudden you're free and you're young and you're fun. And, maybe that only comes on when you drink alcohol. And then the other time you're scared and pessimistic and the sky is falling every day. And it also helps you to learn how to coexist with people who live predominantly in that fear section of their brain and how to actually cultivate safety within a relationship between you and another person so that they can get out of that being like their central access point for life.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. There's some very valuable nuggets in there.
So those are the 2 resources I would suggest.
Thank you. And we'll have the author of that book in the captions. Let's talk about what you're up to these days. I know you're creating something pretty epic with Awaken the Medicine. Tell the listeners what's going on. What are you working on?
Yeah, so I have a women's community called Awaken the Medicine, and the essence of that community is really inviting women into this idea that you have everything that you need to heal already living inside your body. Like your DNA
Love that.
has all the codes. And, of course, there's density and stuff around that DNA that doesn't always let the codes fully come through. And, the body has excess stuff that's just junk. Like I said, the body needs to feel safe to let go. Senescent cells to let go of ancestral stuff, to let go of old junk DNA.
Programming,
like mental blocks, like
right.
scar
habits.
tissue. bad habits. I mean, anything like across the board, right?
Right.
Physical, mental, emotional, energetic.
Right.
And when the body finally feels safe to let go, because the body is the physical vessel that houses all of our energy. So all the codes of enlightenment that we could ever go out into the world to try to access actually live inside of us. And what we're
Right.
really doing is just coming into contact with things outside of us that help us to come into contact with the resistance internally, keeping those codes from starting to really unravel and unwind. And so I say unravel and unwind because when the body unravels and it unwinds, the somatic body can start to have a conversation now that's not so like pent up, like we just have to get through this, which is kind of the energetic imprint of the Western society. And so what my community is doing is we're learning how to unwind and unravel aspects of the self that have been pent up for a really long time. And some of those are pent up because ancestrally, like this is just the way the women of your family has carried themselves. These are the stories that are deeply embedded in your lineage. This is, the relationship you have to the masculine, to God, to religion, to sex, to money. These really deep ancestral aspects that are, you're not the first person in your family to come into contact with money. You're not the first person in your family to come into contact with sex and sexuality and eroticism. There's stories that have been passed down, and most of them we're completely unconscious about. And so what I'm inviting women to do is to come into this space and to learn enough of the foundations of like, let me help you understand your brain and your inner workings, the faculties of your body, and your fascia and how your fascia and having things like scars and having surgeries and having autoimmune and having just places in your body that you don't feel connected to, how all of that is actually for your expansion, how all of that is actually very specific puzzle pieces that are coming together. And when they come together, it's going to unlock this version of yourself that you came here to unlock. And so it's really about destiny, and it's really about purpose and service and accessing things that are just our absolute birthright to access. So in addition to teaching about, the science, which is what we can measure, I'm also taking women into the adventure of the unseen and learning how to use their bodies as an instrument of creativity and pleasure and play and alchemy. So that's what Awaken the Medicine represents. And then the other project I have going on is specifically for women who have had major surgeries like explant surgeries, C-section surgeries, they're not really in a place where they're like, yeah, I want to explore plant medicine and I want to explore and unravel myself. They're like, their bodies are so physically and chemically traumatized that, that community is for women who are like they're like on their last leg.
Wow.
And they don't really have like a lot of motivation and desire to take their healing any further because they've already spent so much money and time and energy trying to find fixes for like deep nervous system dysregulation or organ dysfunction or autoimmune or just like lots and lots and lots of symptoms. And so, I have that community that gets access to everything that Awaken the Medicine gets to, but it's just it's a smaller community for women who are really, really suffering. And then Awaken the Medicine is for women who are, looking to kind of explore and expand beyond just like, we need to SOS, heal this person, get this person their life back.
Wow. So you're actually cultivating and curating spaces for many different communities of women and different layers of trauma and different layers of healing. And you're also doing stuff for explants. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, explanting is the process of women taking their breast implants out. So there's a pretty big like movement going on right now where women are starting to realize the connection between autoimmune and the immune system attacking the body and breast implants.
Right.
A lot of the implants, that have been discontinued by this time and have had lawsuits and, companies that have already gone bankrupt and all of that stuff, like none of that stuff gets talked about.
Wow.
But it's a pretty big wave. And I've met women who are like on their last leg of life. Like they went into surgery because they were dying and they were, had very little life force left in their bodies. And then you have women all the way from that spectrum to someone like me who already had autoimmune and already had all these issues and it wasn't necessarily coming from my breast implants. I was just sick from a lot of different things, from childhood, from trauma, from growing up around a lot of pesticides, being on antibiotics as a kid, having like really intense physical and emotional trauma at 13. And so when I had my implants taken out, for me, I was actually in this healing journey where I was like, I am spending so much time and energy learning to connect with myself and with others. And then I just have these little plastic bags hanging out. Like every time I would hug someone, I could feel, like the Alex Gray paintings that are so beautiful.
He's awesome, yeah.
I felt like I was not able to be in an Alex Gray painting energetically.
Why? Because you had big tits?
Yeah, because I had plastic there.
Oh, plastic.
Yeah, not. I mean, if you have big breasts, like that's great, but the energy, like if I was hugging somebody,
because they were fake and plastic.
The flow, just the materials that it was made out of. Like if you were to take, like a mushroom and you would take out into the forest, and then you were to take those mushrooms and they're all communicating with each other, and you're listening to the sounds that they're making, and then you put plastic bag over one of them. What do you think would happen?
Right, cuts the connection.
Fucking cuts the connection.
Right. Wow.
Immediately. So I became aware of this energy, and I'm very sensitive to energy. Like this is a big part of my gifts, and also part of just what I desire to cultivate here is that sensitivity, that energy. And I became aware of that. So that was why I took mine out. So I wasn't suffering from breast implant illness in the same way that like some of the women that have come through are suffering with it, where they're just like incapable of getting back to their life, being mothers, being wives, like, going back to their fitness classes, doing their jobs.
Right.
So that there's a lot of different textures and varying degrees of where women are at within their implant explant journey.
Question on that topic is, and I'm just purely out of curiosity, how many women, or what's the percentage of women that get implants and then go into and decide to take them out for toxicity reasons or any other reason? You know?
I don't know what the percentage is, but I know that there is a statistic that's like around 40% of women that get implants have some kind of underlying symptoms very soon after they get implants, like within 6 months.
Wow.
I think that a lot of this stuff is hidden. And I mean, I still see plastic surgeons that would they'll die on the hill of like breast implants are completely safe.
Right. It's their livelihood.
Yeah, it's their livelihood, which, for me is just like immediately red flag. Because anybody saying like, hey, talk about nature, like going back to nature.
Yeah.
Like imagine getting in contact with your great grandfather, right? And you're sitting at a table with him and you're having a conversation and you just lightly bring up that you had a surgery. Like his mind would not even be able to comprehend how you could possibly be cut open and how that process would leave you like still alive. And of course, like medicine has advanced so much. It's like, thank God for that.
Right.
But the reality is that like we pretend like surgery is not a big deal just because it's easy to get. It's a massive deal. Like you're laying completely unconscious on a table, but just because your consciousness isn't in the body, which is already an issue. That's a big issue for energy, for chi, for your organs.
Right.
But now you're laying unconscious on a table and your nervous system is trying to wake you up and communicate with your body. Hey, just so you know, you're being sliced. Your nervous system's not like, oh, you're being sliced open, but we know it's all good because we also know that you're going to get closed up and your surgeon has this whole protocol. Like that's not the way that our cells communicate. That's not the way our fascia communicates. And there's some like really cool studies around like how when you bring in a scalpel in towards tissue and like fascia, it immediately starts to retract and you're completely unconscious. Like the person's not even awake to do this. So the body is responding to this whole process. And when you get cut open, the reality is that it could bleed out or you could get an infection like pretty quickly. There's just nothing natural about surgery.
Right. Doesn't sound very natural.
Yeah. And then the way we recover from it is like, then there's like 30% of women that are having babies are having C-sections, and those are like scheduled by doctors because it's more convenient. And there's an impact. The conversation is around the impact that takes place when we make decisions that are based on convenience and they're based on like, well, this makes sense on paper, but negating the multidimensional aspect of how the body is communicating as an ecosystem, and that when you create a kind of traumatic wound in that way, the scars and the things that are taking place in the body as a way to survive ultimately create an energetic signature that your body holds. And then you move through life with that signature the same way you do with emotional trauma. Something happens to you in your childhood, until you completely unravel that and allow it to completely disintegrate so that the body can feel safe to let go, then you carry that emotional trauma with you your whole life. Yes, people that have that.
Right.
The same thing with physical trauma. And so, the unwinding of that is really important.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like And I'm sure certain surgeries have helped many people. You know, I've played pickleball with a guy that had knee surgery, and he has this, you know, metal device on his knee now, but that's the only way he's able to play pickleball, you know, but it's definitely something to consider how far away from nature that really would be, you know, and there's other quantum healing aspects of it that we could look into. So
Yeah.
very good points.
Yeah. And I'm not saying like don't ever get surgery, because sometimes surgery is all that saves your life. But I will say, like, I've heard the same thing with people that are like, well, I tore my ACL, I had to get surgery. But like, one of my ex-partners tore his ACL, never had surgery. And he's like one of the most insane athletes I've ever met. He rehabbed it, you know, by himself. So there's the invitation is just like, just because somebody says, hey, this is your best option and your most convenient option, again, that goes to the, you know, the left brain thing. And it's like, it doesn't matter what decisions you make for your life, as long as you understand that there is always an impact. And for some of the women that I'm seeing in my community, they didn't just have implants put in and have that surgery. Then they also had a mommy makeover and a tummy tuck, or maybe they had an appendix taken out, or maybe they had a C-section or a hysterectomy. And then they had their implants taken out. And the impact of like not being connected to our bodies and our nature of like what we go through in this life, like we have to unravel that, and we have to allow ourselves to like really integrate and process and digest, so that we can like move through life as if like what's happened to us has happened to us, you know. And the Western world just kind of makes it as if like you just come in and it's fine and we get it over with, and then you just move on with your life. And I think that's what I'm seeing with especially the explant community is like, that's obviously not the case. And a lot of women are in a really fucked up place now because they believe that was the case.
Right. What I'm hearing a lot in these topics is the separation from nature. And I'm a big believer that nature has all the answers. You know, I don't have the answers personally, but the more that I tap into nature and, you know, nature's technology, which I consider mushrooms, the more that I'm able to download this information and then ideally embody it and practice it and share it with the world. What are some ways that the listeners, the viewers, can be more connected to nature?
Yeah, first, the thing that I always think of is reconnection to the elements. So there's so much value in like the infrared aspect of the sun and even fire, live fire, that you can only get from the sun. You can only get from live fire or like a red light, you know, like so much of us, like I love my red light. Don't get me wrong.
Me too.
But there's a difference between us barricading ourselves off from nature. And it's like, if in the middle of the day you're sitting in front of your red light when you could just be sitting in front of the sun.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Or at night in front of a live fire.
Right.
Good point. And you're heating your food up. Like, are you heating it up in a microwave? Are you heating it up even in like an air fryer that has, you know, Teflon on it? And not understanding like every little layer that you are in that takes you a little bit further from nature has a consequence.
Right.
And so for instance, every time that I'm cooking food, you know, inside of my house and I'm not cooking it on an open fire, of course it's way more convenient. Every time that I go to Whole Foods and I just buy something in a little plastic carton, it's so much more convenient for me. It's so much easier for me to go and buy a hot coffee than it is to make one at home and to like grind the beans myself and instead put them in something that has EMFs. And I'm like, and as we know, everything that has water molecules in it is heavily affected by the amount of electromagnetic vibrations that are going on around us. So that gets me into the conversation around water, right? The elements. Are we bathing in water? Are we drinking water? Are we living in coherence with water in its natural state? The more removed we are from it from its natural state, the more that it is in our homes and it's sitting and it's stagnant and it's not being a part of nature. If we remove water from nature, it's not in nature anymore, right? And you know, I just think of like, God, like how much more I love like an open fire with like actual wood, like the crackling of wood. One thing that they've done a research on that I think is phenomenal is that in forests, a sign that there's no predators around is a lot of birds chirping. And so naturally, people's nervous systems become really regulated when they hear the chirping of birds because it signals to the subconscious body that you're safe. If a predator was around, you would start to hear silence because the birds wouldn't be calling attention to themselves. Now, all of a sudden, you're attuning to nature and you're saying, what's going on, right? So you're part of that mycelium network. Your feet are on the ground, getting your feet on the earth, not wearing rubber shoes for every single thing you do. like fabrics that are plastic, polyesters, like they've tracked the vibration of fabrics. Like even cotton, has quite a higher vibration, but nothing compared to wool and to linen. So wearing things on your body that touch nature, the vibration of nature, right? One of the other things I think of is a lot of us, we want to eat fruit in the winter, and we want to do all these things that are not actually like natural.
Right.
And I'm not trying to tell you like don't make your smoothies in the winter, but just also thinking about what's local and what's good for the ecosystem. It's not a conversation of veganism versus carnivorism and blah, 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 and all these complex things that people want to identify. It's really a conversation of like what allows the ecosystem to thrive. Because if the nature is thriving, we are thriving if we are in nature, because we are nature. Right. There's no separation. If we separate ourselves from it, we don't thrive. And also nature doesn't thrive. And they've shown that as well. If you've ever seen the wolves of Yellowstone, the whole aspect is like when you take people out of nature and you barricade off, these aspects of forests and national forests and things like that, and there's nobody really tending to the land, and you start to kind of interfere with the way that nature is moving, then the land becomes sick and things die off. And then there's not enough vegetation, there's not enough groundhogs, so there's not enough eagles. And so the whole ecosystem starts to get degraded.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. So that's how we're living in our houses. We're living in plastics. We're absorbing so many environmental toxins. We're drinking dead water. We never see infrared lights unless we're sitting in front of a red light. That's if you're really privileged and you understand biohacking. And a lot of us are just sick, but like we don't catch sunrises, we don't catch sunsets. Like that's the first. All of these things that I just mentioned are free.
Right. Great.
So that's the first step, I would say, to returning to nature.
It's great advice. Tap into the elements. Those are the 4 essential elements of nature. So the more that we could have a relationship with those, the more that we could start to build a foundation to get these codes, So on that topic, on codes, we actually met at a psychedelic conference the first time we met in Miami. It was a lot of fun. I'm curious, what is your view on psychedelics in regards to mental health and or nature and or the quantum?
I have such a powerful relationship with psychedelics. And I'll use that word because I've done beyond plant medicine. I've also had some of my most profound experiences with animal medicine and some synthetic things as well. I think there's absolutely a time and a place. And I think that if as a society we were a bit more connected to nature, there wouldn't even be like much of a concern around psychedelics and people losing their mind at all. I think that people are trying to connect, like it's like this desire to get back to their nature and to nature, but they're not doing anything in their life to actually do that. And then they're taking 5 grams of mushrooms like inside of closed painted walls. And then that opens up all this stuff. And what we know about like ego is so fragile. So the moment that you displace ego from one place that it has been clinging onto, it's going to have to find another place, especially the more fragile that it is. So it's like a swinging monkey that will find any vine that it possibly can. And that's when people think they're getting downloads, and then they're like, like I'm God, or they like have all these experiences that are very strong ego, but like they're a different conversation and it's still like distortion. So I've both facilitated plant medicine ceremonies. I've had them gone wrong. I've had experiences where I did psychedelics and I actually ended up with PTSD. I've had experiences where I healed things like my endometriosis, which doctors told me I could never heal. I've had experiences where I've watched actual miracles come through. I've watched it transform my friends' lives. So it's a really vast conversation around like, what do I think about psychedelics? It would be an individual basis. If you came to me and you said, hey, what do you think about me going on an exploration of psychedelics? I would say, well, which one?
Right.
And I would say, well, what's your intention with it?
Let's get more specific then, because that's a great, and I agree. Psychedelics is a realm of possibilities that is so vast, and each psychedelic medicine has its own lane, really, and possibilities that go with it. So let's talk about my own personal favorite one. What do you think about mushrooms specifically in regards to mental health specifically? How can mushrooms, which is nature, some of the oldest nature, literally been around for eons, how does mushrooms play a factor in mental health for you?
Yeah. One thing I will say is I think the risk factor of microdosing for every single person on the planet is the lowest risk out of any medicinal prescription that you could possibly give anybody.
Love that.
I mean, the lowest dose of microdose.
Mm-hmm.
If people are taking 0.025 and you were to give that free to every single person on the planet, I think we would see the most incredible evolutionary shifts of healing and peace and harmony and, countries working together, societies working together. And I think it would eventually just dismantle everything that you and I both hate and are always ragging on. For me personally, mushrooms just reminds me of who I am. It doesn't come in and get in the way and try to be anything or, it's like, it's so interesting because I will say this. I've heard so many conversations about psychedelics, and sometimes there's this interesting projection that gets like certain plants, especially master plants, will get projected onto as gods in certain ways,
right?
Where people will start to worship them.
Yep.
I personally don't know anybody who worships mushrooms, even people that serve, like you are like, part of my life's mission is to serve mushrooms and their consciousness and what they're bringing here to the planet. And it just always feels so clean because mushrooms have this like very detached way of coming in and being like, I will help you unravel and create clarity. And like, I will give you the greatest codes today and I'll give them completely free without attachment. And then they just kind of go away. I've never experienced, and I'm speaking in essence, so it's not as direct of a conversation. This is something I've experienced through the sensory process of sitting with mushrooms many times. And I just feel like, they're about as neutral and of a plant, and they don't feel like an entity as much as some other plants do, where you're like conversing with like a being.
Yeah. And
you and I've talked about this. You refer to mushrooms as a technology.
Yeah.
And
nature's technology.
Yeah. And that was the first time I ever heard that. And I resonate with that more than anything else. It's just like you're plugging into nature.
Yeah.
And when you plug in, like, it's a plug and play. And sometimes nature's way smarter than you. And so it's like, we're going to go down this route.
Yeah.
But it also it just feels like it keeps your autonomy intact.
Amazing teachers, and it's like they just show us that we're continuously students in this game of life. Thank you for that. That was some great insights. I think people will really appreciate that. Speaking of codes, I'm on another podcast called Codes with my friend and business partner, Ryan Vera, who who's a genius. And every time on that show, we talk about a code that has changed your trajectory in life. I see a code as a new outlook. You get a new mind, and with a new mind, you have a new trajectory that you can now go in a different direction. So what's one code that you can share with us today that you would offer to the world as, say, okay, if I had to give you one code to go and change your trajectory, and you could just pick one, which one would you go?
That even if I had the book of the code of all codes from all the code bearers, that not a single one of the codes will stick unless you are fully connected to breath.
Boom.
Simple
and so effective, and I completely agree. Breath is a master code, and the more that you can master your breath, I believe the more you will master yourself. So, great one.
It's the first code I plan to help my children master.
Nice. Well,
like it'll prioritize over almost anything else, like I'll never be like yelling at my children while they're upset and being like, this is why I told you to not do this thing. It's like I just need to help them get reconnected to their breath so that they're actually capable of like absorbing anything that's going on in their environment, So I feel like it is one of the first codes and almost none of us learned it.
That'd be beautiful, and your kids would be superiorly advanced to their peers with that code. So thank you for sharing that. I think, the more that people can tap into their breath, it does wonders, and I've heard like a year of practicing breath work can do more than what 10 years in therapy could do. It's really just so powerful. So great point. Shifting gears a little bit, what's something that you believe that most of your friends or peers would strongly disagree with you?
About my dry fast.
Oh, dry fast. Okay.
Yeah. I would say like I don't get any more pushback from even my own friends than when I say like that I think that dry fasting is one of the ultimate codes on the planet that like, I mean, I think that it is like, it's the original fast, you know, like it's true fasting. Like even fasting with water is still introducing something into the system. And, you know, I'm also not at all saying that people should do it, because I think most people are so disconnected from nature and their intuition that like, this is one of those things, the consequences can be death. I will just say that, like, you can absolutely die.
Yeah.
But I think that later down the road, we're gonna start to see a tremendous amount of research, hopefully, around the benefits of dry fasting and allowing the body to go through a recovery process that it just can't do when anything's being introduced, when you're having to digest anything else.
Absolutely. I believe fasting is a code for sure, and dry fasting is the peak of the fasting. And like you said, it's dangerous, big risk, big reward. You know, the codes that you get while doing this dry fast would be astounding. I could imagine only. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I've never done a dry fast, but I've done water fast. I know that's not the same thing, but I believe it would be an amazing feat. So congratulations to you for doing that. I think that takes a credible amount of courage and strength and discipline. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit. This is something I just like to ask people. Who is someone, if you could have dinner with one historical figure, who would it be and why?
I would have dinner with my dad. I have the most amount of unspoken things. Yeah, there's something really stronger to me than regret. And really, like, I live my life now because of that. Like, I'll say whatever I need to say. Like, I'll look stupid. I'll throw myself, you know, into the fire and never have the level of regret that I have with him. And like, as much as I'd love to sit down with Jesus, everything I've ever wanted to say to Jesus, I've already said.
Right.
So I feel like, yeah, I feel like there's also like the part of my life where I am looking for somebody else's wisdom to be the thing that's going to transform me. I'm beyond that.
Yeah.
I'm beyond that. Like, I really just like trust my path so much, and I trust the codes that come through me. And I really do believe that everything is coming from my body, and not just like my DNA, but from the collective DNA. Like the subconscious is the unconscious. Everything that can be, will be, lives within me. And I trust my ability to access those access points when I'm really ready for them. And I know that my appreciation for accessing those codes will only be greater when I've done a lot of work to get to those. You know, so there's a lot of codes that kind of hit together all at once, but there is no person that I would rather sit down with more.
That's beautiful. I said historical to try to, I knew you would probably say your dad, so I tried to do
I couldn't even help it.
I know.
Like, I couldn't even help it. Like, the second that you asked the question, it was like, I was just like, I literally, there is no other answer.
I love how honest and authentic you are. I think it's such a high frequency to be on, and it clearly radiates from you. So thank you for being honest and authentic about that. It's beautiful. Is there anything else that you've shared so much today? I think, you know, you've probably mind blasted the viewers with all your knowledge and codes, and you dropped many, many powerful codes here today. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think I just would share that, like, when you're on your journey of trying to figure out, you know, who you are and what healing is and how you're going to make it happen, you know, all the outside searching for how to create the level of healing that you want to come into contact with, it's like everything you're talking about is the vibration of love. And so sometimes when we go searching really hard, if healing is really just vibration in its fullest form, you know, enlightenment is ultimately consciousness without resistance, and shadow is consciousness expressing itself with resistance. So that's distortion, the many layers of distortion. So healing is like letting vibration move. So it's removing distortion so that vibration can flow freely, until we get to a point where we sacrifice our body to be in higher states of consciousness. That's what I believe Jesus did, and Buddha did, and figures that are not incarnated here. But if you recognize that like everything you're doing is to get into contact with love, then you can start to recognize that it is less about what you do and it is more about the essence of which you do everything with. That opens your vibration to healing. And that has brought me so much further than any master teacher I've ever met, any plant teacher I've ever met. And, any healing modality that I've come across that worked like wonders for another person or had all the science to back it up. But if I went into that with the essence of like, I have to heal, I'll be more worthy, or this better work, or I'm trying to fit in a bunch of things at once to try to fix something that I don't like, then that is the essence. And that essence is ultimately what I will manifest. And if the essence that I'm trying to manifest is connection and vibration and healing, then how can I actually embody what it means to be a being that can receive vibration and connection, healing? That's like the greatest code that no matter what other codes I get, like I'm always returning to, is like, it's all love. And it's all love through the lens of your distortion. And if you can start to really discern between, the very specific flavors of your distortion, which I really believe is why we have to get into the right brain and we have to really start to understand the sensory body, because you cannot see distortion linearly on a piece of paper. Something can look like one thing and be something completely different because it's 2-dimensional or it's 3-dimensional. The sensory body is much more multidimensional than that. And so as you learn how to taste and to feel the sensations that your body is communicating to you about something, you have access to a lot more data about it, which is what gives people the power to be discerning, which is what gives people the ability to really trust themselves and their path, which is what cultivates inner safety.
Boom.
Boom.
Well said. I won't even try to top that. That was just wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful. Adrian, where can people find you, Awaken the Medicine and all that stuff? Where, if they wanted to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, super easy. Instagram is the easiest place, at Adrian Ellison, ADRIANELLISON. I know you'll put it in the notes as well.
We will.
On there is like, that's the where you can go and you can access all the different things I have going on. And my Instagram is also where I share resources of other people who are just doing phenomenal things in the world. I write content on there. I share everything on there. And as of right now, that's it. And as of the last 6 years, that's been the easiest place to get in touch with me and to find my links and my free resources.
Awesome. So on Instagram, Adrian Ellison. Adrian Ellison, thank you so much. Thank you. This was a mind-blasting conversation. I learned so much and you dropped some major codes. So really appreciate you coming on here.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you. We'll see you next week with more interesting and deep conversations with people that are eons ahead. Thank you.